I teach 3 classes at a university in Michigan: Introductory Composition, Advanced Composition, and Finding Success in Your Education and Career. The students I teach in each of these 3 classes generally have no idea that they have agency. In fact, I don't even think that they are aware of the concept of human agency. And despite my efforts to make human agency a foundational lesson of each one of my classes, the students in the Introductory to Composition class and their work through 1 1/3 essays do not show me that they've begun to understand that. Human agency is the concept that you are in control of your own life. You have everything that you need at your disposal to control the way your life comes out. And yet, this is something that I, for one, was not super aware of when I was their age, and so I cannot fault them for not understanding that idea. However, through 5 weeks of school thus far, I'm not finding them putting forth any effort in general to establish their agency. In the introductory English class that I'm teaching this semester, we teach students about the writing process, the organization of academic papers, a little bit about research papers and APA formatting and citations, essay structure, critical thinking, integrating sources, developing ideas, connecting ideas and experiences. In general, it's about how you think, developing your ideas, and working to make your ideas external so other people can understand what you're thinking. And at this point, 5.5 weeks into my second year of teaching this course, I find myself quite tired, exhausted, unsure of where my responsibilities end and where the students' responsibilities begin. Like I said, I've been teaching this content at this school for 2 years now. This is my second year doing so, and I previously taught 5 semesters of sports communications at a different school, which basically taught the same concepts and ideas through the perspective of sports. Now, just earlier today, before I started recording this video, I finished grading the outlines for their second papers. Their second papers are a narrative, descriptive, reflective essay in which they generally have to connect an event or something important that happened in their lives to a greater theme and explain the connections between the theme and their lives, essentially communicating why that event was so important to them. And the paper is not about the event specifically. It's about how the event impacted you, how you became a different person because of that event. And very few of the students in the outlines that they've submitted have made those connections. I put a lot of effort into seeing that they understand that this is what the assignment is about, but it's deflating to not see those results. And I admit that I am clearly not doing the things that I should be doing in order to get them to understand what they need to understand. But at the same time, I am not also seeing that they are putting enough effort and energy into their portion of our implicit agreement. And so thus, when I see an outline in this case that is quite lackluster, I find myself putting the same amount of energy and effort into grading the piece as I can tell that they put into producing the piece. Having graded all the outlines, the average score was 26 out of 40. The standard deviation was 8.75 and the variance is 76.65. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I do not know what the standard deviation or the variance is, but I'm not happy with the average score being a 26 out of 40. That, for reference, is 65%. Even though the percentage of this assignment does not matter, I would like to see that be a bit higher. In addition, the grade distribution shows that the majority of the class got between a 60 and a 69. And again, that is percent, while the rest of the majority lies in the 70 to 79% range, as well as the 80 to 89% range. Now, my issues with the students and their work are a few things. One, they only, to my eyes, seem to do what they think they need to do before stopping. They will not do more than what they consider to be necessary. And once they have reached a point where they can't offer anymore, or that they're confused on what to do past that point of what they've already offered, they won't offer anything more. They will not ask questions. They will not communicate their confusion or needs to me. They will simply submit the work and deal with the consequences. Also, in some cases, it seems like they don't even believe what they're writing. that they'll just write something that sounds good and not care about whether it actually applied to them. They'll think of some platitude or some cliche and communicate that as the general theme of the essay, and then try to fit their own situation into that theme, regardless of if they have to lie to communicate the full narrative. It seems that so often these students only know, and thus are only comfortable with, doing what they're told. Any type of gray area seems to completely freak them out. It's as if they don't know what not to do, to the extent that they're able to identify that they need to ask for help, but they're not comfortable doing that, so they don't. Any gray area to them is completely confusing, such that they shun even navigating it. One student wrote about going to a Buddhist temple in Thailand. They take a lot of time describing the history of the temple, how and why it was built, a conversation they had with a monk regarding happiness, and then the piece ends with the author saying, "The whole experience was something I'll never forget. Specifically, my favorite quote from the monk that I spoke to: 'If you want to enjoy life, enjoy every moment, because every moment is a part of life.'" But the student makes no attempt to connect the lessons learned at the temple, specifically that one that they mention, to their life, prior to that encounter at the temple or after that encounter. And so everything they say falls completely flat. So many students are full of surface level observations in which there's no depth or connection to anything other than the experience that they are sharing. It appears that they generally don't know how to connect concepts that aren't immediately obviously similar or connected. One student wrote about a near-death experience and how much it changed them, but didn't discuss at all the details of that experience. Just that it made my life more valuable. It was a crazy experience, and it taught me that I needed to be more careful. It taught me to value my life and be more precautious. It could change at any moment, and yet there's no connection to how the student lived life after experiencing that near-death experience. If you're going to discuss this sort of thing, you should be able to discuss the details of it such that you can communicate the lessons you learned from that experience. But what the student actually provides here is simply cliches about living life to the fullest without actually sharing any examples or experiences of how they've done that post their near-death experience. So many of these students seem to avoid doing things if they're not immediately good at them. To them, some things don't need to be done. Some things just end up happening whether or not they do them. And a huge challenge that I'm finding myself facing is to get them to understand that just because they haven't done them before, or just because you don't know how to do them, doesn't mean that you won't have to do them in the future. One student wrote essentially this in their outline: "Life was very simple before, and there was little to nothing to worry about. I also didn't really care about much or anything at all." This is an example from one student, but I think it can be applied to about 90% of the students that I have encountered. If something doesn't directly affect them, they don't care about it. And they will not take the time or the effort to understand how it does affect them, or how their actions can influence any change in that regard. A local guy mows my lawn, and he came by earlier today to do that. And in talking with him, we got off on some tangents, and he was saying how things aren't like what they used to be. And I thought about that in the context of these students, as well as in general, because that's something that a lot of people say. People often want to revert back to when things were simpler. You know, when I was a kid, we didn't have these problems, or when I was a kid, things were a lot easier. I think the reality is, when you were a kid, you weren't exposed to the complexities and nuances of life. And now that you're an adult, you are scared of these things and you don't know how to process them or deal with them. You can't process them internally and you can't deal with them actionably externally. I think to say that things were easier back then is to be misguided in your thinking. It's not that things were actually easier. It's that you were younger and you weren't aware of how complicated things actually are. Your desire to return to a simpler time is really you keeping yourself from living in reality. People who say that, in my opinion, want to know less. where they can ignore things that don't make sense to them. They want to live with ignorance. Society looks at the students in my class who are 18 years old or older, or within a few months of being 18 years old, and says that those people are generally young adults. And yet, having spent time with those individuals, I can say that I see them as more like grown children. But an additional thing that's important that I haven't talked about yet is I was quite similar to a lot of these students. I think when I was that age, I also struggled with understanding how the complexities of the world affected me. I knew that the world was complex, but I could not tell how what was happening in the White House or in a different country, which might be at war, had anything to do with me being where I was at that time. And I think I'm better equipped now to understand how those things apply to me and apply to all of us living our lives. We all have to-do lists and schedules and things that we have to do, places that we have to be. And those things don't directly influence whether or not Ukraine or Israel are at war. But they don't have nothing to do with those things. This video is also less about where the blame lies, because there's a lot of different themes going on in this video, and I don't know that I've done a great job of paring them down. College for me was a decent-sized wake-up call. And it seems like college for these students, at least in my class, is an even bigger wake-up call. Probably because of the state of our society nowadays is a bit more developed than it was 10 years ago when I graduated college, 10 plus years ago. I do wonder what an appropriate level of responsibility and accountability I should have for these students is. Because I have felt very much in the past, and I still feel very much, though not as much as I used to, that I'm responsible for making sure that these people are aware of things that they are not aware of. I cannot force them to understand anything, but I can at least bring things to their attention. I cannot force them to drink, but I can at least lead them to water and communicate why it's in their best interest to drink. But I find it very sad, really, that these students don't feel the need to expose themselves to anything that they're not already comfortable with or that they're not already good at. I've done my best to try to communicate to them they will have problems and challenges in the future that are currently unforeseen. That you can use the information that I'm providing now in this class and in other classes, I'm sure, to help you navigate those situations when you become exposed to them. And yet, since they think they don't have to worry about anything unless it directly affects them, they don't feel like they have to listen to anything that I'm saying here. That's my worry. Part of what I want to get out of teaching is also part of what I want to get out of being a public communicator, which again is leading people to water and helping them understand why it's in their best interest to drink the water. Yet at this time, I question where my responsibility ends and where the student's responsibility begins.